They fired me on a Tuesday, not in a quiet office with the door closed, not in an email. They did it in front of 11 contractors, 2 city council members, and a deputy infrastructure director from the state of Ohio. While I was standing at the head of a conference table explaining a drainage calibration issue that nobody else in that room even knew existed. My name is not important right now. What matters is that I had spent 26 years keeping the Hargrove County water infrastructure system from falling apart. I started as a field technician at 31, climbing into concrete culverts in January with a flashlight and a clipboard, while other guys my age were getting MBAs. I worked my way up to senior systems engineer, then to lead infrastructure coordinator, managing a network of treatment facilities, pump stations, and stormwater controls across 4 counties in northeastern Ohio. The system moved roughly 80 million gallons a day. I knew every valve, every sensor, every legacy override that had been grandfathered in since 1987. I knew where the bodies were buried, figuratively, mostly. The trouble started when the county brought in my new director. I'll call him my director, because that's what he was on paper, though he never once acted like someone who needed to understand the work before he started reorganizing it. He came from a consulting background in Chicago, 41 years old, sharp suits, the kind of guy who used the phrase digital transformation in sentences that didn't require it. He had a strong LinkedIn presence. He'd been featured in a trade magazine for co-authoring a white paper on next-generation municipal systems thinking, which, as far as I could tell, meant using dashboards to make decisions that used to require actually walking the system. He looked at me the way people look at old furniture, like maybe it was valuable once, but it takes up a lot of space. The first time he tried to cut me out of a major project, I told myself it was just a communication issue. He'd assigned a vendor presentation to my junior colleague without looping me in. And when I raised it, he told me he was restructuring the decision pipeline. I wrote it down. Date, time, what was said, who was present. I kept a notebook. Paper, blue ink. I'd been doing that for 11 years, ever since a previous dispute over a maintenance billing error taught me that memory is not documentation. The second time, he reassigned my direct report without telling me. I found out when she asked me who she was supposed to report her weekly numbers to now. I wrote that down too. The third time, he introduced me at a regional conference as our senior field consultant instead of lead infrastructure coordinator. Small thing, but I watched him do it deliberately. He paused just slightly before the title, like he was choosing it. I wrote it down. I wasn't planning anything. I just kept records because that's what you do when something doesn't feel right and you don't yet know why. The project that changed everything was called the Hargrove Consolidated Modernization Initiative, HCMI. 11 counties across northeastern Ohio pooling resources to upgrade their water infrastructure under a federal co-funding framework. Total value of the contracts, somewhere around $340 million over 7 years. The county had been working toward this for 4 years before my director even arrived. I'd written half the technical specifications myself. I knew the federal compliance requirements, the legacy system constraints, the soil contamination variables near the old industrial corridor that would affect underground pipe routing. The lead federal representative for the initiative was a woman named Dr. Elaine Forsyth, mid-50s, no nonsense, came up through the Army Corps of Engineers before moving into EPA infrastructure oversight. She had been coordinating with me directly for almost 2 years. We'd built a working relationship based on the understanding that I spoke plainly and didn't waste her time. My director wanted to take point on the final stakeholder alignment meeting. That was the meeting where 11 county representatives, 2 state officials, and Dr. Forsyth's team would agree on the unified compliance framework before formal contracts were drafted. It was, effectively, the last major step before everything became legally binding. He told me 2 days before the meeting that my role would be observational. He said he wanted to present a unified leadership voice to the stakeholders. I asked him if he planned to brief with me beforehand so I could walk him through the legacy constraint variables. He said he had the documentation. I asked which documentation. He said the briefing package his assistant had compiled. I knew what was in that briefing package because I'd been asked to contribute to it. It covered the standard specs. It did not cover the informal technical understanding I'd built with Dr. Forsyth's team over 2 years. It did not cover the compliance exception we'd negotiated around the industrial corridor. a specific undocumented agreement that existed as a series of emails between me and Dr. Forsyth, not in any formal record. It also did not cover the sensor calibration anomaly I'd identified 6 weeks earlier in the East Branch pump station, which was relevant to the Phase 2 routing plan. I told him he needed that information before the meeting. He told me to put it in an email. I sent the email that night. I kept a copy. I documented that I'd sent it. I noted the time, 9:47 p.m. I noted that he had not responded by the time I left for the meeting the next morning. The meeting was in a conference room on the 4th floor of the county administration building. A beige room with bad lighting and a projector screen that you had to tilt slightly to the left because the mounting bracket was warped. 11 people around the table plus staff along the walls. I sat in the second row. My director stood at the front. He was good at the beginning, confident, well-spoken, moved through the overview cleanly. The county representatives were nodding. I watched Dr. Forsyth. She was polite, but taking notes, which with her meant she was finding things to ask about later. The problem came 40 minutes in during the Phase 2 routing discussion. He presented the pipe routing plan through the industrial corridor using the standard spec, the one from the briefing package, the one that did not account for the compliance exception. He pulled up the map. He described the timeline. He talked about cost efficiencies. Dr. Forsyth put her pen down. She asked calmly whether this routing accounted for the amended soil contamination classification on the eastern parcel, the one her team had agreed to flag as a conditional exception, pending additional geotechnical review. The one she and I had spent 2 months negotiating around. My director said he wasn't aware of an amended classification. The room got quiet in a particular way, not the quiet of confusion, the quiet of people recalibrating. Dr. Forsyth looked at her notes. She asked if the senior engineer was present. She was asking for me by title, not by name, but the people who'd worked with me knew who she meant. I raised my hand from the second row. She nodded in a way that said several things at once. My director turned around, and whatever he saw on my face, I genuinely don't know what it was, something shifted in him. He turned back to the room and said, clearly, in front of everyone, that my services on the project were no longer needed and that I should feel free to leave. I didn't move. Dr. Forsyth asked him to repeat what he'd just said. He did. He said the county was moving in a new direction and that field-level technical personnel were not required at the executive coordination level. There was a long pause. Dr. Forsyth closed her folder. She said she appreciated the county's time. She said that her team would need to pause the alignment process pending a review of the technical compliance documentation. She said she would be reaching out to reestablish contact with the appropriate subject matter experts before any further meetings were scheduled. She stood up. Her 2 staff members stood up. They gathered their things. Then one of the county representatives from Cuyahoga, a guy who'd been coordinating with me for 3 years, who'd once called me at 7 in the morning because a pressure reading was off and he didn't know what it meant, he stood up too. He said he shared Dr. Forsyth's concerns. He said he didn't think it was appropriate to move forward without full technical continuity. 2 more county reps followed him. My director stood at the front of the room with his hands on the podium and watched 11 people's consensus dissolve in about 4 minutes. I stayed in my seat the whole time. I didn't say a word. I had not planned any of this. Dr. Forsyth had simply asked a technical question that he couldn't answer, and the rest followed from that. I want to be honest about something here, because I've told this story a few times now, and I've noticed people want it to feel like a movie, like I'd set a trap and watched it spring. I hadn't. I'd sent an email the night before and been ignored. I'd sat in the second row like I was told. I didn't stand up. I didn't speak. I just knew the answers to the questions that got asked, and he didn't. That's not a trap. That's 26 years. After the meeting cleared out, Dr. Forsyth stopped by where I was still sitting. She asked if I had the documentation on the industrial corridor exception. I said I had it. She gave me her direct line, not her assistant's number, her direct line, and told me to call her Thursday morning. I drove home that afternoon and sat in my kitchen for a long time. My daughter called that evening. She was worried. She'd heard something secondhand from a mutual contact at the county and wanted to know if I was okay. I told her I was fine. She didn't believe me and drove over anyway. We sat at my kitchen table, and she made coffee, and I told her the whole thing from the beginning. She's 30 years old and works in healthcare compliance, so she understands bureaucratic dysfunction in a cellular way. When I finished, she looked at me and said, "Dad, you have records of all of this, right?" I showed her the notebook. She looked at it for a while. Then she said, "Okay, you're going to be fine." I don't know exactly what happened internally after that meeting. I know what I was told, and I know what I can infer. What I was told came from the county HR coordinator with whom I'd had a professional relationship for many years, who called me the following Friday. Not as a formal communication, just a person calling a person, and said that things were in motion and that I should stay available. What I infer is that Dr. Forsyth's withdrawal from the meeting and the subsequent withdrawal of 3 county representatives created a problem that was difficult to explain upward without implicating my director's decision to remove me. When your federal partner pauses a $340 million initiative because the technical lead was dismissed mid-meeting, that's a question the county commissioners are going to ask. And the answer to that question has a name attached to it. My director was placed on administrative leave 12 days after the meeting. I was told this by 2 different people independently, neither of whom was supposed to tell me. The call from the county administrator came on a Monday morning, 3 weeks after I'd sat in the second row of that conference room. He asked if I was available to meet. I said I was. We met in the same beige 4th floor conference room, same warped projector bracket. He was there with the deputy county executive and an attorney. They asked me to return as lead infrastructure coordinator with a revised scope that included direct liaison authority with the federal partners on HCMI. They also offered an adjustment to my compensation. I had a number in my head that I had written down the night before. Not an aggressive number, just a fair one, based on the actual scope of what they were asking me to come back and do. They met it without negotiating. I asked for one other thing. I asked that my documentation practices, the notebooks, the contemporaneous records, be formally recognized as part of my job function, not treated as an anomaly or a liability. They agreed. I signed on a Wednesday. I was back at my desk on Thursday. The first thing I did was call Dr. Forsyth. She was brief and professional and said she was glad the county had found its footing. I told her I'd have the updated corridor compliance documentation to her by end of week. She said that worked. The second thing I did was call the Cuyahoga County rep who'd stood up in that room. I didn't have a specific reason. I just wanted to tell him I appreciated it. He said, "I've been working infrastructure in the state for 20 years. I know who knows the water." I thought about that for a long time afterward. There's a version of the story where I make it about my director, about how arrogance met consequence, about karma and justice and what goes around. I understand why people like that version. There's something satisfying about it. But honestly, sitting here now, what I keep coming back to is smaller than that. It's the email I sent at 9:47 p.m. that nobody answered. It's the notebook with the blue ink. It's the 2-year working relationship with a federal official built on never wasting her time. It's my daughter driving over because she was worried and making coffee because she didn't know what else to do. The HCMI project is currently in its 3rd year of implementation. Phase 1 contracts are fully executed. Phase 2 routing is underway, using the amended corridor plan that accounts for the soil contamination exception. The East Branch pump station sensor anomaly I'd flagged 6 weeks before that meeting was corrected during Phase 1 commissioning. It would have caused a significant pressure variance if it had gone unaddressed. I still keep the notebook, blue ink, new one every 18 months or so. I keep the one from that year in the desk drawer to my left, not as a trophy, just as a reminder that the work is what it is, regardless of who's standing at the front of the room. I've thought about what actually happened in that room a lot since then. Not the drama of it, the mechanics of it, why it went the way it did. My director didn't lose because he was loud or cruel, though he was both those things at moments. He lost because he made a decision based on how things looked instead of how things worked. He looked at me and saw someone whose time had passed, older, quieter, less polished than what he was building. And so he moved me out of the way. What he didn't account for was that the thing he was building didn't actually work without what I knew. That's not a metaphor. It's just engineering. You can redecorate a system all you want, but if you don't know where the override is, the system fails. There's something I've come to believe about the way consequences actually work in a professional life. And it's simpler than most people want it to be when you do the work honestly, when you document, when you follow through, when you build relationships on the basis of straight talk instead of performance. You create a kind of structural integrity around yourself. Not armor, not leverage, just a record of reliability that other people have staked their own credibility on. Dr. Forsyth hadn't vouched for me personally. She just built her federal compliance process around the assumption that when I told her something about the Eastern Corridor, it was accurate. When my director tried to remove that piece mid-process, the whole structure had nowhere to lean. That's what I mean when I say I hadn't planned anything. I hadn't. But 26 years of doing the work right had created a situation where removing me created a problem that couldn't be quietly absorbed. My daughter asked me that night at the kitchen table whether I was angry. I thought about it for a while before I answered. I told her I wasn't sure angry was the right word. I was tired. I was frustrated that it had come to that point at all. But there was something underneath the frustration that I didn't quite have language for until later, something closer to steadiness. The kind that comes not from knowing how things will turn out, but from knowing that you did the work the way it needed to be done, regardless. I think that steadiness is something you build slowly, the same way you build anything that lasts. It comes from deciding, a long time before the crisis arrives, what kind of person you're going to be when nobody is watching, whether you're going to cut corners on the documentation because it's 10 o'clock at night and nobody will know, whether you're going to stay in the second row when you've been told to, even when everything in you wants to stand up and correct the record, whether you're going to make the harder phone call instead of the easier one. Those decisions accumulate. They don't feel like much individually, but by the time you're sitting in a beige conference room while a $340 million initiative falls apart around a question you already knew the answer to, they're the only thing you actually have. The notebook is still in my desk drawer, blue ink. I started a new one last month. I'll probably keep doing that until I retire, and maybe after. Some things are just worth writing down.